The day the sky went quiet was a Tuesday. Dale was mopping the floor in the control room of the very large array, the same floor he'd been mopping for 22 years. The radio, usually crackling with a country station from Socorro, was dead. Not static, not the faint hiss of a lost signal. It was a deep, profound silence, the kind of quiet that felt heavy, like a blanket smothering the world. He'd flicked it off and on. Nothing. He checked his phone. No service. That wasn't unusual out here in the New Mexico desert, but the radio silence was. That was wrong. He finished his mopping and sat at the main console. A place he was supposed to clean, not use. The screens were all dark, officially powered down for a decade, but Dale knew the secrets of the place. He knew about the backup generator and the hardline connection that still, for some reason, nobody ever bothered to sever, drew a trickle of power. He flipped a few switches under the desk. One of the monitors flickered to life. It was a diagnostic screen, mostly lines of code he didn't understand. But one line, at the very bottom, blinked with a steady, unnerving pulse. It was a system alert, a message received. This was impossible. The VLA was a cosmic ear, not a mouth. It was designed to listen to the whispers of creation, not to receive texts from the void. Curiosity, a dull and rusty thing in his soul, got the better of him. He typed in the old override command, a string of letters he'd seen a scientist use years ago before the funding dried up. The screen cleared. A single word appeared, written in a stark, blocky font. It was in English. Reckon in. Dale stared at it. The word felt cold. It felt like a final judgment. He thought it was a prank. Some hacker. But the landline was dead too. The whole world was offline. The silence outside wasn't just the absence of radio waves. It was the absence of everything. No birds, no insects, no distant rumble of a truck on the highway. The world had been muted. And in the center of that deafening silence, a single word on an old screen. He felt a tremor of fear, deep and primal. This wasn't a prank. This was an answer. He knew, with a certainty that chilled his blood, what the question had been. Everyone knew. It was the last thing humanity had broadcast before everything went dark. The final message, they called it. A single word beamed from every satellite, every radio tower, every transmitter on the planet, in a final defiant shout into the abyss. They'd sent a word out, and now the abyss had sent one back. The drive into Magdalena was the strangest 10 miles of Dale's life. The silence followed him, clinging to his pickup truck like a shroud. The sky was a brilliant, empty blue, too empty. He realized he hadn't seen a single contrail. No planes, not one. The world felt like a photograph. Still and perfect and terribly wrong. He passed an overturned semi on the side of the highway. No smoke, no fire, no sirens. It just lay there on its side, a dead metal beast. He didn't stop. He didn't know what he would even do. Magdalena was a ghost town, but a living one. People were out, standing on their porches, clustered in small, quiet groups on the sidewalks. They all had the same look on their faces, a mixture of confusion and a deep animal fear. Their mouths were shut, as if they were afraid to break the silence. The town's single traffic light at the intersection of Main and Highway 60 was dark. Cars sat motionless in the street. Dale parked in front of the sheriff's office. The door was propped open. Sheriff Brody stood behind his desk, his big hands resting on its surface. Brody was a man who looked like he'd been carved from the rock of the surrounding mountains, but today he looked small. His face was pale, his eyes darting around as if expecting something to jump out of the shadows. "Dale," Brody said. His voice was a hoarse whisper, loud in the dead air. "What the hell is going on?" "You tell me, Sheriff. My radio is out, phone's dead." "Everything's dead," Brody said, gesturing to the silent police radio on his desk. "Not a peep, not from county, not from state, not from God himself. People are spooked." Miller down at the diner said he saw his dog, Buster, run straight into a wall and drop dead. No reason, just stopped. Dale felt a knot tighten in his stomach. "It's the message," he said, the words feeling heavy and foreign in his mouth. Brody looked at him, his eyes narrowing. "What message?" "The final message, the one we sent out, reckoning." The sheriff scoffed a dry, humorless sound. "That was 6 months ago, Dale. A stupid stunt by a dying government. A cosmic middle finger. What about it?" "We got a reply," Dale said. He watched the sheriff's face, saw the disbelief warring with the fear that was already there. "At the array, on one of the old monitors. One word." Brody leaned forward, his knuckles white on the desk. "What word?" Dale hesitated. Saying it out loud felt like casting a spell. It felt like giving it power. But he had to. "Reckoning," Dale whispered. It sent the same word back. The color drained completely from Sheriff Brody's face. He sank back into his chair, a sudden old man. The silence in the room deepened, broken only by the sound of a fly buzzing near the window, a sound that was suddenly shockingly loud. But as they both turned to look, the fly stopped buzzing. It fell from the windowsill onto the floor, a tiny black speck. Another thing that had just stopped. Outside, the sun began to set, casting long, distorted shadows down the empty main street of Magdalena. The shadows looked like grasping fingers. The only person in Magdalena who might understand was Dr. Aris Thorne. She wasn't a real doctor, not anymore. She'd been one of the head astrophysicists at the VLA back in its glory days, a brilliant mind with wild hair and a wilder temper. After the shutdown, she hadn't left. She had bought a small, dusty adobe house on the edge of town and filled it with books and charts and strange humming machines she built herself. The townsfolk called her the Star Witch. Dale found her on her roof, sitting in a lawn chair next to a small homemade satellite dish, pointed at the blank sky. She didn't seem surprised to see him. "The silence is a pressure, isn't it, Dale?" she said without turning. Her voice was calm, almost serene. "You can feel it in your bones. The universe is holding its breath." "Aris, I saw something. At the array." "The echo," she said, finally turning to look at him. Her eyes were bright, feverish. "You saw the echo." "What are you talking about?" It was a word on a screen. He told her the word. She nodded slowly, a thin smile on her lips. It wasn't a happy smile, of course. Symmetric, poetic even. They have a sense of humor, it seems. "They? Who is they?" Dale asked, his frustration growing. She corrected the substrate, the source code, the thing we've been screaming at for 100 years with our radios and our bombs and our pathetic little lives. We thought space was empty, Dale. It's not. It's full. It's a medium, and it has rules. She stood up and walked to the edge of the roof, looking out over the desert. Humanity was a toddler, throwing a tantrum in a library. We made so much noise. Finally, the librarian had to say something. The final message wasn't a threat from us, Dale. It was a legal declaration. Legal? What are you talking about? Cosmic law, maybe. Or just cause and effect on a scale we can't comprehend. Think of it like this. You can't just walk into a courtroom and start screaming. But if you stand up and formally declare, "I demand a trial," well, you are going to get one. Humanity, in its infinite, arrogant wisdom, stood up in the great silence and screamed one word: reckoning. We demanded it. We invoked it. Dale felt a cold dread wash over him, colder than the desert night air. So what is it? What is this reckoning? It's a balancing of the books, Harish said, her voice dropping to a whisper. An audit. The universe is now going to weigh every single thing we ever did. Every kindness, every cruelty, every secret, every loss. It's not coming for us with starships and laser beams, Dale. That's not how it works. It's coming for us from the inside out. She pointed a long, bony finger towards the town. The streetlights were trying to flicker on, but their light was weak and yellow, pulsing strangely. In the dying light, Dale thought he saw a figure standing in the middle of the empty highway. It was just a silhouette, small and indistinct. "What is that?" he asked. Iris Thorne's smile was gone. Her face was a mask of terrible understanding. "That," she said, her voice trembling for the first time, "is the beginning of the testimony." Dale drove home in a daze. Iris Thorne's words echoed in his head. An audit. A balancing of the books. It sounded like something out of a cheap horror novel. But the silence in his truck and the wrongness of the sky told him it was real. He pulled into the driveway of his small, lonely house. He'd lived there alone for 5 years, ever since Sarah died. The house was dark. He didn't bother with the lights. The power was probably out here too. He walked through the familiar rooms, his boots echoing on the hardwood floors. The silence in his house was different. It was older, deeper. It was the silence of grief. He had gotten used to it, but tonight it felt different. It felt like it was listening. He went into the kitchen and opened the fridge, forgetting for a moment that it wouldn't be cold. He grabbed a bottle of water and sat down at the small kitchen table. The moonlight coming through the window painted a silver square on the floor. He sat there for a long time, just drinking his water and trying not to think. Then he heard it, a sound from the living room. It was a soft, gentle sound, a humming. Dale froze, his heart pounding against his ribs. He wasn't alone. He stood up slowly, grabbing the heavy iron skillet from the stovetop. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was solid in his hand. He crept towards the doorway of the living room, his every nerve screaming. The humming grew a little louder. It was a familiar tune, an old folk song she used to hum when she was sewing. He peered around the corner. Sarah was sitting in her favorite armchair, the one he hadn't been able to bring himself to get rid of. She was there. Not a ghost, not a memory. She looked solid, real. She was wearing the yellow sundress she'd worn on their last anniversary. Her head was bent over her lap, her hands moving in a familiar pattern, as if she were mending a piece of clothing. And she was humming. Dale's breath caught in his throat. The skillet fell from his hand and clattered loudly on the floor. She didn't look up. She didn't react to the sound at all. She just kept humming, her hands moving through the same motions over and over again. Dale took a step into the room. "Sarah?" His voice was a raw, broken thing. She didn't answer. He took another step, his legs shaking. He could see her face now, illuminated by the moonlight. Her expression was placid, distant. Her eyes were open, but they weren't seeing the room. They were seeing a day from 5 years ago. He was close enough to touch her. He could smell her perfume, the faint scent of lavender that he thought he'd forgotten. "Sarah," he said again, louder this time. He reached out a trembling hand to touch her shoulder. His fingers went right through her. There was no substance, no resistance. It was like touching cold, empty air. But for a split second he felt it. A phantom sensation, a memory of warmth on his skin. Sarah didn't flicker. She didn't fade. She just kept humming, sewing a phantom piece of cloth, trapped in a single perfect moment from a life that was over. Dale stumbled back, his mind reeling. This was the reckoning. This was the audit. It wasn't about monsters from the stars. It was about the ghosts we make ourselves. The universe wasn't sending us demons. It was sending us our own memories, our own losses, to live with again. The sun rose on a changed world. The silence remained, a constant, heavy pressure. But now it was being punctuated. Sheriff Brody stood on the steps of his office, a shotgun held loosely in his hands, and watched Magdalena come apart at the seams. He wasn't just seeing things anymore. Everyone was. Old Man Hemlock's wife, dead 30 years from a bad heart, was sitting on their porch swing knitting. She didn't speak. She just swung back and forth, the chains making no sound. Down the street, two brothers who'd had a fistfight over a girl back in '98 were replaying the scene in the middle of the road. They threw silent punches, their faces contorted in rage, their bodies moving through the motions of a long-forgotten argument. They were like glitches in reality, loops of the past, bleeding into the present. Brody's radio crackled, a sudden, harsh burst of static that made him jump. A voice came through, garbled and panicked, at the old schoolhouse. "My boy, I can see my boy," the voice cut out. The old schoolhouse had been abandoned for 50 years. Brody got in his patrol car. It started, thank God. He drove through the surreal streets, swerving to avoid a phantom herd of cattle that had once stampeded down Main Street after a fence broke in a storm. They moved without sound, their ghostly forms passing through parked cars. He found Maria Sanchez clawing at the chain-link fence around the schoolyard. Her face was a mess of tears and dirt. "Sheriff." "It's him, it's my little Ricky." Brody looked. There on the rusty swing set, a small boy was swinging. He was maybe 7 years old, wearing overalls and a red t-shirt. He pumped his little legs, swinging higher and higher, a look of pure joy on his face. "Ricky died, Maria," Brody said, his voice gentle but firm. "He fell from that swing set. You know that." It had happened before Brody was even sheriff, a town tragedy everyone knew. "I know, but he's right there," she sobbed. "He's there. Let me in. I have to hold him." Brody knew what would happen. Her hands would pass right through him. It would break her all over again. "Maria, you can't. It's not real." "It looks real," she screamed. "It's not," Brody said, his voice harder now. "It's a recording, a cruel movie. That's all it is." He'd seen 3 of them already this morning. 3 echoes, as Dale had called them. Aris Thorne's words seemed fitting. They weren't ghosts. They didn't seem to have any awareness of the present. They were just moments, torn from time and replayed for an audience of the living. The audit. A balancing of the books. Brody thought about his own life, the mistakes he'd made, the person he'd hurt. His ex-wife who'd left him because he was married to his job. Would he see her? Standing in their old kitchen, her face tight with disappointment, telling him she was leaving for the 1,000th time. The thought terrified him more than any alien invasion. This wasn't a war you could fight with a shotgun. This was a war against memory itself. How do you fight your own past when it's standing right in front of you? Swinging on a rusty swing set, a joyful smile on its face. He looked from the crying mother to the laughing phantom of her son. And for the first time in his 30 years of law enforcement, Sheriff Brody had no idea what to do. Dale didn't sleep. How could he, with his dead wife humming in the next room? He spent the night in the kitchen, watching her. The moonlight faded and the sun rose and she was still there. The light of day made her seem both more and less real, more solid, her yellow dress a cheerful splash of color in the dusty room. Less real, because the morning sun should have cast a shadow, and she cast none. She was a memory given form, a slice of a perfect afternoon. He remembered that day. They had just paid off the house. Sarah had been so happy. She'd put on that dress and hummed that song all day. He had been grilling outside. He remembered the smell of charcoal and the sound of her humming. A perfect duet of domestic peace. He tried to talk to her again. He told her about his day. He told her how much he missed her. He told her he was sorry. Sorry he hadn't been there when the cancer came back so fast. Sorry he'd been at work when she'd passed. His words were absorbed by the silence. She just kept humming, her phantom needle and thread moving, moving, moving. He got angry. It was a hot, useless anger that filled his chest. "Stop it," he yelled. "Stop humming that stupid song." The echo of his wife continued its placid work, oblivious. Yelling at her was like yelling at a movie screen. The characters can't hear you. The story is already written. Defeated, he sat back down at the table. He started to notice the details of the loop. The hum wasn't continuous. It was a single phrase of the song about 10 seconds long, then a pause of 3 seconds. Then the phrase repeated. Her hands moved in the exact same way each time. A stitch, a pull, a slight turn of the non-existent fabric. A 10-second loop of happiness, playing for an eternity in his living room. He thought about what Aris had said. The universe was weighing them. Was this his weight? Was this his judgment? To be haunted not by a screaming ghoul, but by his happiest memory. To have the best day of his life turned into a form of torture. A constant reminder of what he had lost. So close he could see it, but forever out of reach. He decided to test a theory. He walked over to the armchair, his heart a cold lump in his chest. He stood there watching the loop. Hum, stitch, pull, pause. Hum, stitch, pull. He timed it with his watch, 12.7 seconds, exactly. He took a deep breath. He stepped into the space she occupied. He sat down in the armchair. The sensation was indescribable. It was an explosion of cold, a vortex of nothingness that passed through his body. But it was also more than that. For a fleeting instant, he felt what she felt. A wave of pure, uncomplicated contentment. The warmth of the sun on her skin, the satisfaction of a task well done, the deep, abiding love she had for the man she could hear grilling just outside the window. He felt his own presence from her perspective, a comforting, beloved background noise. Then it was gone. He was just Dale again, sitting in an old armchair in a silent house, his body shivering from a cold that wasn't there. He looked at his own hands. They were empty. The echo of his wife was gone. By occupying her space, by intersecting the loop, he had disrupted it. The living room was empty again. The humming was gone. The silence that rushed back in was worse than before. It was the silence of a double loss. He had lost her all over again. The reckoning, he realized, wasn't just about seeing the past. It was about being forced to interact with it, to break it, to prove over and over again that it was truly, irrevocably gone. Sheriff Brody had declared a town meeting. It was a pointless gesture, he knew, but he had to do something. The people of Magdalena gathered in the small town hall, their faces etched with fear and exhaustion. The echoes were everywhere now. A ghostly child played hopscotch on the sidewalk. A spectral mailman walked his route, placing phantom letters in mailboxes. An old prospector and his mule, legends from the 1880s, silently trudged down the center of the highway. The past was literally overlaying the present. Dale was there, sitting in the back. Aris Thorne was there too. Standing near the front, her arms crossed, watching the proceedings with an unnerving calm. "We have to stay calm," Brody began, his voice amplified by a battery-powered megaphone. It sounded tinny and weak against the profound silence. "I know what you are all seeing, these tall things. They can't hurt you. They're like projections. Don't touch them, don't interact with them. Just try to ignore them." A woman in the front row stood up, her eyes wild. "Ignore them. My dead husband is in my kitchen, making coffee. He's been making the same pot of coffee for 2 days. The smell is driving me crazy, but tea here is no coffee. How do I ignore that? My father is out in the yard," another man shouted. "He's replaying the moment he had his heart attack, over and over. I have to watch my father die every 15 minutes. Panic began to ripple through the crowd. Aris Thorne stepped forward. "He's right," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "You cannot fight them, and you should not ignore them. You must understand them." All eyes turned to her. "This isn't a haunting," she explained, her voice taking on the tone of a patient teacher. "This is an accounting," we shouted, reckoning into the void. The void is an impartial judge. It has no concept of good or evil, happy or sad. It only understands cause and effect, action and consequence. For every action humanity has ever taken, there is a consequence, an echo left in the fabric of space-time. She pointed out the window. "That prospector out there. He died of thirst, looking for gold. His echo is the consequence of his greed. That little boy on the swing, his echo is the consequence of a moment of carelessness. Your husband making coffee, your father having his heart attack. Those are the consequences of love and loss. The universe is showing us our receipts. It's showing us the bill for our entire existence." Dale thought of Sarah. The consequence of their love was this beautiful, painful loop. What was the consequence of the final message itself? The arrogance of it. "So what's the point?" Brody asked, his voice heavy with weariness. "What does it want from us?" "It wants nothing," Aris replied. "A trial doesn't want anything, it simply proceeds until a verdict is reached. This is our trial. Humanity is on the stand. Every one of these echoes is a piece of evidence being presented to the jury." "Who's the jury?" someone called from the back. Aris Thorne turned and looked directly at Dale, then at Sheriff Brody, then at the terrified faces in the crowd. "We are," she said softly. "We are the jury. We are being forced to look at everything we were, everything we did, until we pass judgment on ourselves." A new echo appeared in the back of the hall then. It was a young soldier in old, tattered fatigues. He looked terrified. He was whispering something, a prayer or a name, over and over again. He was an echo of a war nobody in the room had fought, a consequence from a different time and place, now presented as evidence in the town hall of Magdalena, New Mexico. The trial was expanding. The bill was getting longer. The next few days were a slow descent into madness. The echoes were becoming more frequent, more intrusive. They weren't just personal memories anymore. History was collapsing in on itself. A troop of Spanish conquistadors marched silently through the desert, their armor glinting in the sun. A herd of bison, long extinct in this region, stampeded through the middle of town, their phantom forms passing through buildings. The town of Magdalena was becoming a chaotic collage of its own past. The psychological toll was immense. People stopped going outside. They boarded up their windows, not to keep things out, but to avoid seeing what was already there. The loops were a form of erosion, wearing away its sanity. The woman whose husband was making coffee had a breakdown, screaming and throwing things in her kitchen, trying to smash the phantom coffee pot. The man who watched his father die every 15 minutes had simply sat down on his porch, catatonic, his eyes fixed on the spot where it happened. Dale tried to help. He showed a few people, including Sheriff Brody, how to disrupt the echoes by occupying their space. It worked. A touch of cold, a flicker of a forgotten emotion, and the loop would break. But it was a temporary solution. The echoes always came back, sometimes in the same place, sometimes somewhere else, and new ones were appearing all the time. One evening, Brody came to Dale's house. He looked 10 years older. "It's getting worse, Dale. I saw one downtown. A car crash from years ago. The sound. There was sound this time. A faint screech of tires. It's the first time I've heard one of them make a noise." Dale felt a fresh wave of dread. They're evolving? "Or the system is ramping up," Brody said, slumping into a chair at the kitchen table. Aris thinks the initial phase, the silent projections, was just the opening statement. Now the evidence is being presented with more fidelity. Dale looked out his window. For a moment, he thought he saw the echo of Sarah in the yard, tending her roses. But it wasn't her. It was a different woman, someone he'd never seen before from a different time. The house had a history before him. The land had a history before the house. The echoes were digging deeper. Aris was talking about the VLA, Brody said. She thinks it's the focal point. The epicenter, the message came back through there. The connection is still open. What does she want to do? Shut it down, Dale asked. She says we can't. It's like trying to shut down a hurricane with a blanket. She said the signal isn't coming from the dishes anymore. The dishes were just the key that unlocked the door. Now the door is wide open and the whole area is the doorway. Brody rubbed his tired face. But she thinks we might be able to do something else. Not close the door, but fight. Speak through it. Dale thought about the console, the blinking cursor after the word reckoning. It had looked like it was waiting for a response. Speak what? Dale asked. Another word, Brody said. An answer. A plea. A closing argument, maybe. She says humanity started this conversation. Maybe we have to be the ones to finish it. The idea was insane. To try and talk back to the cosmic force that was tearing their reality apart. But what was the alternative? To sit here and watch as the past consumed the present, as their world drowned in a sea of its own memories. Where is she? Dale asked, standing up. She's already there, Brody replied, getting to his feet as well. At the VLA, she's waiting for us. Outside, as they walked to Brody's patrol car, the air shimmered. For a second, the world went hazy, and the faint, overlapping sounds of 1,000 different moments in time washed over them. A baby's cry, a gunshot, a lover's whisper, a steam train's whistle. The audit was getting louder. The VLA was a different place at night, under the weight of the reckoning. The giant satellite dishes, stark white against the desert floor, seemed to hum with a silent, unseen energy. They were no longer just listening. They were broadcasting. They were the projectors for the universe's grim movie. Dale and Brody found Aris in the control room. She had managed to get more of the systems online. Screens that had been dark for a decade glowed with eerie green and blue light, displaying complex patterns and waves of energy that made no sense to Dale. In the center of the main screen was the word Reckoning. The cursor still blinked beneath it, patient, waiting. The field is stabilizing, Aris said, not looking away from her monitors. The phenomenon is coalescing around this point. It's like the eye of the storm, the quietest, most powerful place to be. Quiet, Brody said, gesturing outside. It's getting louder out there. The echoes are chaotic out there because they are unfocused, Aris explained. Here, at the source, the signal is pure. It's coherent. If we are going to send a response, it has to be from here. It has to be as pure as the one we received. Dale walked over to the main console. He looked at the word reckoning. Such a hard, unforgiving word, a word of judgment, of debt, of finality. It was a word chosen by angry, frightened people who thought they were shaking their fist at an empty sky. They didn't realize the sky would answer back. So what's the word, Aris? Dale asked. What do we say? Sorry, mercy, please stop? Aris finally turned away from her screens. Her face was grim. I don't know. That's the problem. I can open the channel. I can give you the keypad. But I don't know what word to send. What single word can possibly answer reckoning? What word can summarize humanity's closing argument? Sheriff Brody leaned against a console. What about innocent? Aris shook her head. Are we? Look at the echoes. The wars, the greed, the carelessness. We are being shown the evidence of our own guilt. To claim innocence would be a lie. The universe seems to value truth above all else. Guilty then, Brody suggested. That's just an admission, Aris said. It doesn't end the trial, it just invites the sentence. They stood in silence for a moment, the three of them, the fate of the world resting on a single impossible choice. Outside, the air itself seemed to vibrate. Dale could see them through the large control room window, dozens of echoes moving across the desert floor. Soldiers from forgotten wars, families having phantom picnics, lone figures staring up at the unmoving stars. All of them, pieces of humanity's long, complicated story. Dale thought about his own echo, Sarah, humming in her chair. It was a memory of love, but it had been turned into an instrument of pain. He thought about the man watching his father die, over and over. He thought about Maria Sanchez, separated from her son by the impassable wall of time. The reckoning wasn't just about punishment. It was about pain. It was about forcing them to relive every loss, every moment of suffering. It was a cycle of grief on a planetary scale. He looked at the blinking cursor. It wasn't just waiting for an answer. It was a challenge, a demand. Show us who you are. Justify your existence. It's not about guilt or innocence, Dale said, his voice quiet but clear in the humming room. It's not a courtroom. Aris and Brody looked at him. It's an audit, Dale continued, remembering Aris's own word. You have an audit to see if the books balance, to see if it can all be squared away. But it can't. There's always a remainder. Always a loss. You can't balance the books on grief. He stepped up to the keyboard. His fingers hovered over the keys. He wasn't a scientist or a sheriff or a philosopher. He was just a man who had lost his wife and mopped floors for a living. But he understood loss. And he understood when something had gone on for too long. He knew the word. It wasn't clever. It wasn't profound. But it was the truest thing he could think of. It was the only thing left to say. Dale typed the word. 5 letters. He pressed the enter key, the click echoing in the silent control room. The word appeared on the screen, directly below the first one. Reckoning. Nuff. For a moment, nothing happened. The cursor just blinked at the end of the new word. Aris held her breath. Brody gripped the edge of a desk, his knuckles white. The hum of the machines continued, and outside the phantom parade of history marched on. Dale felt a crushing wave of disappointment. It had been a stupid, sentimental idea. A word was just a word. Then the screens flickered. All of them. The complex wave patterns flattened out, becoming straight, calm lines. The humming from the consoles deepened in pitch, lowering into a soft, gentle thrum, and then faded into nothing. The lights on the panels blinked out one by one, until the only light in the room was the pale desert moonlight coming through the window. On the main screen, the 2 words remained for a second longer. Then they dissolved, not like pixels turning off, but like smoke caught in a breeze. They simply vanished. The screen went dark. The 3 of them stood in the absolute silence. But it was different now. The pressure was gone. The heavy, listening quality of the silence had lifted. This was just regular quiet. The old, familiar quiet of the desert at night. Slowly they walked to the window. They looked out at the vast expanse where the VLA dishes stood like pale skeletons. The echoes were gone. The conquistadors, the bison, the lonely figures, all of them had vanished. The desert was empty again, just sand and sagebrush under a sky full of silent, distant stars. Brody let out a long, shuddering breath. Is it over? I don't know, Aris said, her voice filled with a new kind of awe. We declared the trial had begun, Dale. I think Dale just declared it over. He didn't offer a defense. He didn't ask for mercy. He just told the court that enough evidence had been presented. Dale didn't feel like a hero. He felt empty. He thought of Sarah. Would he have traded this empty piece to see her one more time, even as a phantom? The question hurt. He pushed it away. He had done it for the man who had to watch his father die. He had done it for Maria Sanchez. He had done it for a world that couldn't bear to look at its own ghosts any longer. They drove back to Magdalena as the first hints of dawn touched the eastern horizon. The town was still. The streetlights were off. The cars were parked where they'd been left. But the feeling of oppressive dread was gone. A few people were hesitantly emerging from their homes, blinking in the new light, looking around at a world that was blessedly, wonderfully empty of the past. Dale dropped Brody and Aris off and drove to his house. He walked inside. The living room was empty. The armchair was just an armchair. There was no humming. There was no ghost of his wife. The house was filled with the same silence of grief he had lived with for 5 years. But for the first time, it didn't feel like a weight. It felt like his own. It was a silence he had earned. He went out onto his back porch and sat down, watching the sun come up over the mountains. The world was quiet. The radios were still dead. The phones didn't work. The sky was still empty of planes. Humanity was alone, cut off from its own technology, left to pick up the pieces in silence. They had shouted a word into the galaxy, and the galaxy had shown them the terrible, unbearable cost of that word. And, in the end, A janitor from New Mexico had answered for all of them with a simple human plea. A bird chirped. Dale looked up. On the fence post, a small brown sparrow was puffing out its chest, singing its heart out to the rising sun. It was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. The reckoning was over. The audit was complete. And now, the long, quiet work of living could begin again.